Hey fish addicts, it's Nick here. Today we're going to be going over my top 5 reef custodians, and here we go. So we'll start out super basic. These are just 5 for cleaning up your reef. So my number 1 is going to be Trochus snails. So there's a lot of snails to pick for your reef aquarium when you're first starting out. It can be kind of overwhelming. When I started up my reef, I definitely tried a few different species before I found the Trochus snail, and they're by far, in my opinion, the best. So the reason I like them is they're quick. I've tried out the Asterina stars just because they're such a beautiful snail, and they do clean, but the Trochus just cleaned up my tank pretty much within a few days, so that's why I recommend them. They do eat hair algae, they're going to eat like the blanket algae that you get as well, so they're just a really, really good option for doing the job quickly. And I've also not had any losses of my Trochus snails, which is nice. Some of the other slower snails are more susceptible to being killed by hermit crabs and to starving, so definitely go with the Trochus for your best option in snails, in my opinion. Another great thing about Trochuses is they can actually flip themselves over, which a lot of saltwater and even freshwater snails can't do, so you don't have to worry about losing them because they've fallen down and fallen on their back. So my next suggestion is also going to be a snail, but totally different purpose than your Trochus. So my next suggestion is going to be the Nicarius snail. Tonga or regular will do the job. The great thing about Nicarius is they're carnivores, so whereas you're going to have your mainly herbivore Trochus eating algae, you're going to have your Nicarius picking up food and stuff that falls to the bottom. So whether it's flakes, brine shrimp, mysis shrimp, your Nicarius are going to clean up after it. They also have a really cool nickname. They're called the zombie snail, and the reason they're called the zombie snail is because most of the day they're under the sand bed and they have a little snorkel that they stick up through. And as soon as they smell food, as soon as that food hits the water, they start to like rise from the sand bed, and it's just a really cool thing to watch. It's pretty badass. So the Nicarius snail, not only are you going to pick up food after your fish, because they live and move in the sand bed, they're keeping that stirred. And a lot of problems you have in fresh or saltwater is your toxins sink into your substrate and you get gas bubbles that are pretty much pure ammonia under there. So let's say if you were to rearrange your tank one day or move some rock work, or you decide to gravel vac, if you haven't done it in a long time, you can release those bubbles. So when you have Nicarius in that sand bed, it prevents those bubbles from forming. And they're also going to keep the sand bed moving, which is going to prevent things like cyanobacteria and diatoms from forming on the sand bed. So my next one is kind of also falls into the snail category, but it's a bit more unique, are conches. So conches are going to serve a similar purpose to the Nicarius, but they're a herbivore rather than a carnivore. So the conches are actually going to eat the algae on top of and inside of your sand bed rather than just cruising through the sand bed. And they will occasionally venture up onto the glass and eat some algae off of there as well. In my opinion, one of the biggest benefits to the conches is just how cool these things look. Like, they have this long trunk and these stupid googly eyes, and they look like the vacuum cleaner from Teletubbies, and they're just the coolest things in the world, in my opinion. So there's 2 species I'm going to tell you a bit about. There's the fighting conch, which is by far going to be the most commonly encountered conch you're going to find in the hobby. The downside to fighting conches is they get to be 4 inches, so it's a decent size animal, and it's not going to be suitable for your nano aquariums just because of the pure size. Navigating the sand bed of like a 10, 20, 30, even kind of 40-gallon aquarium is just not possible for a 4-inch animal. So definitely, you know, if it's all you can find, and it might very well be all you can find, get a little one, but just make sure you have a plan for it down the road when it does start to reach a couple inches in size. I have a baby in my 30-gallon. He's doing great so far, but I'm fully aware that once he starts to hit that 3-inch mark, I'm definitely going to have to bring him back into the store. So if you have a small tank and you're wanting your conch for its life, you're not wanting to give it away, a more uncommon species is called the dove conch. And I mention them just because they are a better suit for your 5, 10, 20-gallon aquariums, your nano aquariums, because they stay a lot smaller than the fighting conches do. There's not a lot known about them because they are so uncommon in the hobby, so there's not really like a max size out there, but we haven't really encountered them past 2 inches. So that's a couple different conches for you. They're really awesome. So the next shelled animal I'm going to tell you about are the hermit crabs. So hermit crabs are also a great option. They're a herbivore, which is awesome, unlike your truly carnivorous Nassarius snails and your truly herbivorous Trochus snails. The hermit crabs are going to eat everything from brine shrimp to hair algae. They're just a really great general cleaner. Couple different species, my top favorites, not only for the color but for effectiveness. For a smaller aquarium, go with your scarlets and your dwarf blue legs. They're going to stay a lot smaller than some of the other species and pose less of a risk to your snails. If you have a bigger tank, the electric blues are just incomparable. They have blue and black striped legs. You can see them from across the room. They're just so beautiful. And they get to be about an inch or two, so they do pose more of a risk to your snails, like in terms of killing them and stealing their shells. Another one for much bigger aquariums is going to be the Halloween hermit. I really only recommend them for bigger aquariums, not necessarily because they can thrive in smaller aquariums, but they prefer oval shells as opposed to the round ones. And so once you get those things going on your rockwork, they are going to knock everything over. So unless every single one of your corals and rocks is epoxied down, a Halloween hermit can easily take down a 30-gallon reef. And it's just so annoying, you know, you get a coral fall over overnight on its face and it's dead in the morning, like it's just not worth it. So yeah, definitely make sure you have a bigger aquarium if you're gonna go for the Halloweens, or do it in a lightly scaped tank with not a lot of corals or stuff that's already fully encrusted on the rock. Only downside to hermits is, like I mentioned a couple times, if they don't have enough shells, they will kill your snails. So just make sure that you have upgraded shells for those hermits, and tend to avoid shells like the Trochus. They don't like it. You want rounder shells, you want more oval shells, that kind of thing, like turbo shells, for example, star astrinas. I lost all my star astrinas to my hermit crabs. They love those shells. So my last guy I'm going to tell you about. This one is awesome, but he's also not. So the sea hare. Sea hare is the best hair algae cleaner you can find out there. And that sounds great, but there are definitely some downsides to this guy, which I'm going to explain to you now. So the first one is, as much hair algae as they take in, they poop it back out. So sure, you're not looking at the hair algae anymore, but you are adding to the waste in your aquarium. That's what I found with mine. He was just constantly pooping. Like, the bottom of my tank was a sea hare toilet. It was gross. I was water changing every day. No exaggeration. So for that reason, I'm only going to recommend them for bigger tanks as well. I tried mine in my 30. Like I said, didn't go over super well. He did eat all my algae, but, you know, it wasn't overly beneficial for the tank. The second reason I, have a little asterisk next to the sea hare is because when they die or when they're stressed out, they do have the potential to release a toxin in your tank that will wipe out your entire aquarium if you're not running carbon in your filter. That's a whole nother thing. I don't recommend running carbon in your filter full time. That's information for another video. So just be aware that when you're buying a sea hare, you are taking that risk of possibly nuking your entire tank. It's not that common. I haven't personally encountered anybody it's happened to. It didn't happen to me when mine passed away, and it hasn't happened in the store. So it is an uncommon thing, but it's within the realm of possibility. The third reason I don't recommend sea hares is their short lifespan in captivity. If these things can't constantly be feeding on hair algae, they're gonna die, and they're gonna die pretty quick. A lot of people will buy them and then end up bringing them back to the stores just to save their little lives. So keep in mind, if you're getting a sea hare and you're not planning on bringing it back or giving it to somebody else who has a big supply of algae, your sea hare is not going to make it long term unless you can somehow harvest the massive amount of hair algae it takes to keep them alive. He's just not going to live long term. The last thing I will say about hair algae and sea hares is if you have enough hair algae to think you need a sea hare, there's something wrong in your tank. You need to do some tests. You need to find out, are my nitrates high? Are my phosphates high? Am I overfeeding? Why am I getting this amount of hair algae? It's going to be better to tackle the root of that problem than it is to go out and buy a sea hare. So thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I hope you enjoyed my top 5 reef custodians, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see our next saltwater video.